welcome back to another episode of the Flourishing podcast. How are you, Mel?
I'm really well, and yourself?
Excellent. I'm very good, thank you.
Good.
Again, we're in your beautiful temple in Gippsland. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Gunnakunai, pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, moving into our main topic. So we're going to talk all things Ellen J. Langer.
Yeah, absolutely. So she's one of my heroes, that's for sure.
Yeah, she's becoming one of mine as well. So she has written the wonderful book, Mindfulness.
Yeah.
It's a very simple title.
Yep.
But exactly what it is.
Absolutely.
And she's written another book as well. I can't think of the name of it. That was about
counterclockwise.
Yeah, and that was about the study that we'll touch on briefly a bit later.
Yeah.
So I guess to begin with, let's get into the science of mindlessness.
Yeah.
To begin with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what's really fascinating about this work, apart from the fact that I think she's probably one of the kind of underrated and probably looked over quite often in terms of some of the impact of some of her work, is really, really powerful.
Yeah.
She also doesn't suffer fools, so I'm sure that doesn't go down well in some circles.
Yeah. Okay.
I've watched I was actually present at a very interesting interaction when both she and Marty Seligman were on stage in a panel.
Oh, okay.
And it was very interesting to watch as an observer.
The dynamic between the two
absolutely,
of them. Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So she has, and as she states in her book, all of her research on the concept of mindfulness, for a start, two things are really important. One, it came from her study of mindlessness and the impact that has and how much we are disadvantaged, and as she refers to it, the costs of being mindless in all facets of life.
Yeah.
And so having a look at the flip side of that in terms of mindfulness, she also very carefully states that all of her research on mindfulness has been done from a purely Western scientific perspective.
Yep.
She's had no links in her research to the contemplative practice or the traditional roots of mindfulness. So she's very cautious to talk about not drawing conclusions or correlations between her work and contemplative work.
Yep.
But interestingly enough, the parallels are, really quite strong for those. Heaps and heaps. Yeah. But she uses some really fantastic stories to give us such a bold sort of slap in the face kind of idea of some of her concepts, which I think are fantastic. And in particular, she's done some work around aging, which has been really powerful.
Yeah.
But also things that have translated across into workplaces and just our daily lives.
Yeah, definitely.
So really, really cool stuff.
Yeah, cool. Yep. Can you touch on what mindlessness is? Because some people may not actually like. Mindfulness is something that word's thrown out a lot. People have probably a base understanding of what it is, but mindlessness, they may not have come across that unless they've come across her work before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the concept of mindlessness is really when we operate from a very automated point of view. So our brain, one of the amazing things about our brain is that it keeps us safe all the time. Yeah. But in order to do that, it's developed a lot of real automated processes so that it can, in fact, and I call our brain lazy. It's one of the laziest organs we've actually got. As miraculous as it is, it's also really, really lazy.
Yeah.
And so mindlessness comes from operating often without awareness from a lot of those automated practices. And so what Ellen's been able to do in this book is show those different components of how our brain works and the impact that then has on, if we're not aware and we just operate from that base auto level, then there's a whole bunch of things that we are doing, in fact, really without thinking and without being present and participating in the moment.
Yep.
We're just kind of on autopilot, and not autopilot as in brain dead, kind of checked out, but actually just almost completely automated without even realizing we're doing it. And so the consequences of that are significant in terms of, so just some basic things, what we just accept without questioning.
Mm-hmm.
So if we've been previously presented with a concept in the past, we'll have what she calls a pre-cognitive commitment. So we'll have some kind of relationship to that concept that we may or may not have even deeply thought about, which then just automatically pops up next time. So we could be presented with a completely different scenario, or a scenario that isn't the same as what we've previously taken on board, and we will just automatically interact with that scenario based on that pre-commitment, which then just misses out on a whole bunch of potential other options that we could do in that moment. So it becomes really, really limiting. And so we see that in terms of some of the biases that we operate from. So that's one of the things. The other thing from a mindlessness perspective is the lack of ability when we're quite intelligent people with, amazing capability to think up things like different ideas. We can actually put ourselves in a position where those ideas are just not available to us, even though they're actually not that difficult to conjure up. And some of her experiments, you laugh out loud at some of them, and others you just kind of sit quietly going, wow, it's kind of just really blown my mind, to just show the obviousness of it.
Yeah.
So what we're really trying to do is use this information to say, well, the elements of mindlessness actually do cost us potential. So we will limit potential based on preconceived ideas about what's possible. Either to the point where we don't even explore in the first place, or even if those possibilities are raised, we will quickly dismiss them and not allow them to be pursued, which, can have some really huge consequences.
Definitely. Particularly within organisations or just in yourself as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, big time. Yep.
Cool. All right, let's give this a bit of a base of where she's coming from. She talks a lot about categories.
Yep.
Right, and creating new categories and existing categories. I found this part of her research and her book really, really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And the great story that she uses right at the start is the category of a door.
Yeah.
Right? Once we take a door to be a door and we stick it in that category, even though the door's made of wood, we no longer see the door as a piece of wood. So the story that she tells is the treasure hunt. Someone knocks on your door at 3 a.m, says, I'm participating in this treasure hunt, and I'll give you $10,000. I've got one thing left that I have to find on the treasure hunt, and it's a piece of wood that's about 3 foot by 7 foot. And, of course, the person's thinking, oh, where am I going to get a piece of wood from? They're thinking about what they've got out the back.
Yeah.
And, of course, the next day they drive past a building site and see a door that's not actually hung. It's just sitting next to, and, of course, it's about 3 foot by 7 foot and it's a piece of wood. So she uses that to demonstrate the fact that once we create a category and put something in that category, automatically, without us being mindful and thinking about it, but even if we are really trying hard, it's very difficult for us to break out of the concept that category has produced for us. So a door stops being a piece of wood, and even if we try hard, we can't actually see the door ever again as a piece of wood once it's a door.
Yeah.
And it's a really great example of that. And I suppose the piece around the science there is the fact that all of the categories that we have are pretty much man-made. So they are actual constructs that we create.
Yeah.
And therefore, to be able to create new categories is a really great capacity to develop so that you can be open to new possibilities. You can recognise when you're stuck in particular categories and you're having difficulty seeing things in potentially different perspectives. Yeah,
I love that piece of it. It was so cool. And that example was awesome as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of, you just kind of laugh and go, oh my God, what a no-brainer. But, we think about the amount of times in our lives where we are faced with what could actually be quite a simple alternative scenario, just not available to us.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Do you think there are ways, particularly when somebody's developing in their younger years, like when they're a child or a toddler, like to try and aim to not create those categories, or is it kind of just inevitable now? Like, is it just?
Look, I think part of it is there is an inevitability about it in terms of the way that we work. So our brains are designed to categories makes our brain a lot easier to negotiate.
It's the way of
like
world. Filing.
Absolutely.
It's just like a filing system. It's like in here.
And
in here.
the more that it can categorize things, the safer the world is to negotiate.
Yeah.
And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that in essence, except that at the expense of safety. So for safety being primary, that's at the expense of creativity, seeing other perspectives, being a great problem solver, enjoying totally new and different experiences, potentially the ability to see someone else's point of view. So it's about that balance. So no one's suggesting, and she certainly isn't suggesting, take safety out of the equation.
Yeah.
But what she is wanting to bring to mind is the science shows that element overrides lots of situations that have absolutely nothing to do with safety. And that's where the cost comes.
Yeah.
So the costs that we're bearing for it are not our safety, but they are in terms of the richness of our experience. And certainly if we think about the aged care stuff, which you mentioned at the start.
Mindful aging.
Mindful aging, absolutely. There is a real quality of care crisis going on. I mean, we've got a Royal Commission here in Australia right now for aged care, but there is a real a crisis around quality at the expense of safety.
Yeah.
And she has shown that a lot of, if you like, policies or decisions that are made based on mindless interpretation of circumstances rather than mindful interpretation of circumstances. Yep. To the point where we create people with less capacity, we age them faster, we potentially shorten their lifespan, and there's so much evidence to show that that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, the really interesting part of in that what she was talking about with mindful aging was the experiment. I'm not sure whether she did it or someone else had done it, but they, in an aged care facility, they had taken a person that was there and put them into like a hopeful ward, I think.
It was in hospitals.
In hospital.
Yeah, so people had a pre-category that going to hospital is not a good experience and that you go there pretty much to die or that, And so instead of allowing that category to continue, they in fact changed the category for the exact same experience and people recovered faster. They took less medication. Like real things changed, not just, like someone felt better, but physiological changes, psychological changes, but absolute independent measurable things that were distinctly different with the group whose category was changed in the way that they went about the exact same activity versus those that went with the existing category that we know. And she talks about, simple categories like we're quiet in churches, we're quiet in libraries. Now, I'm not here to debate whether you should or shouldn't be quiet in a library or that you should or shouldn't be quiet in a church, but those are categories that just automatically change our behaviour. We don't go, I'm about to walk in, hush. We just automatically change our behaviour without actually participating. And so whilst one of her great sayings, which I absolutely love, is when someone says to her or in her presence, think outside the square, she responds with, who put the square there?
Yeah.
Like who said there was a square that you had, that you were either in or you were out. So that is that's a category that says when someone comes up with something new, it's kind of out there. Well, who said where there was?
It's like adding a category to before, like you're trying to create new categories, but you're creating a category to create new categories.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's the sort of, she is saying not to just blindly challenge everything that you presented with, but be open to the fact that things as they aren't necessarily as they always will be or always have been or always have to be. And that's what creates us with this amazing ability to interact with the world in a much richer way.
Yeah.
But as science shows, with actual significant benefits.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Interesting. So she also talks about creative uncertainty and then mindfulness on the job as well.
Absolutely.
Which again, I found a lot of that very interesting. So creative uncertainty was one that, like, I guess that there's potentially like she was talking about potential fear, I guess, in a way of people like, or the idea that creative uncertainty is good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the studies for this are really, they're some of my favourite studies probably, and many of the studies that she's done are in my favourite category purely because of the simplicity of their design and the powerful nature of what they demonstrate. Yeah. So one of the ones that I really, really, really love is the concept where two groups are given an object that is really obvious, right? One group, so for really obvious, for example, your pen, right? So you grab this pen, right? So one group is given the pen, which is clearly a pen, and they're told, this is a pen. Your job in the next however much time they've been given is to come up with as many possible alternative explanations for this other than it being a pen.
Yeah.
Okay. The other group is given the pen, which is clearly a pen. It's the same pen, except that all she does in that group is changes the instruction to this could be a pen.
Okay.
Instead of saying this is a pen.
Yeah.
That's the only change in the instruction. And the group is given the same instruction. You've now got the same amount of time to come up with as many alternative options of what this could be. The group that's told it may be versus it is always comes up with more alternatives.
Yeah.
Always. So the piece there is that, certainly in workplaces, we try and be as explicit and clear and certain as we possibly can. And there are benefits to creating certainty, there's no question. But if we create a mindless approach to something, that will come at the cost of what we could potentially produce at the other end. Yeah. And those were, they were fantastic. And what she did was she sort of started with things that were not quite so easy so some quite obscure type objects that people wouldn't have been familiar with.
Yeah.
And would use those. And for one group would tell them what it was, and the other group would again say this could be such and such. But then and the results were really clear. But then in order to really test her hypotheses, they used stuff that was unquestionably what it was. And by posing things as a possibility, we open up the landscape for people to walk into the possibility.
Yeah.
By posing things as absolute, the landscape disappears.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's that creative piece. So in workplaces, the challenge is that how do you balance that sort of certainty, outcome driven, this is what we need.
Yeah.
Because what Alan talks about is in order to be mindful, we talk about process, we focus on how we get there, the steps,
that's what
the journey,
focusing on that process
versus outcome.
Yeah.
So I think it's about powerfully balancing, being very clear with what you're hoping to achieve, no question. So everyone understands the goal, but being absolutely hands off with regards to the myriad possibilities about how you could possibly get there.
Yeah.
And allowing people the option to create in that space things that otherwise, wouldn't even hit the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So powerful.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. No question.
Cool. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on before we finish up was her chapter on discrimination and prejudice and the idea of the word she uses is deviant, which is it's not in the sense of like someone being bad or evil or doing something wrong. It's more deviating from the norm. Yeah,
correct, which is the actual definition of deviant. Yeah. And Kim Cameron uses it in his work with positive leadership as well. He talks about positive deviance and how sad it is that you have to actually say that it's positive, because as soon as you use the word deviant, everyone it's immediately thinks, weirdo.
Yeah.
Yep. So yes, deviant, the term means deviates from the norm, whatever that kind of norm may be. Now, norms are created obviously by categories, right? So that's the connection that Alan talks about.
Yeah.
And so for discrimination, a lot of the categories that are created for things that deviate from the norm tend to have limiting elements to them. So when we think about someone with particular disabilities, for example, whether they be physical or whether they be intellectual, whatever sort of disabilities they are, the category disability creates for us a sense of limiting. And so just by having that category, without us even exploring what the disability might be and what impact that particular disability may in fact have on that individual and the individual's ability to exist in any given environment, we already approach that with a limiting point of view.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, we will potentially completely close out a whole bunch of totally reasonable options that are then not potentially made available.
Yeah.
And so that's what creates some of those very strong biases about what opportunities we would give certain people to do based on coming from that perspective of limiting immediately.
Yeah.
Similar in the old age, old, not capable, go together, hand in glove.
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, we would think, oh, maybe we better not ask grandma to do that, or, oh, we better make sure that, they've got someone with them.
Yeah.
Now, again, not taking safety out, but actually most of the decisions we make are mindless based on limit. But we haven't actually explored the reality of the limit. She uses some really cool examples in this particular chapter about, hiring a deaf developer. If that developer has to work in a really, really noisy environment.
Yeah.
And just a simple concept like that, I bet you there's no organisation out there that would go, oh, it's really actually not a particularly conducive work environment with all of this noise for someone who has to concentrate. Perfect job for someone with that skill set that actually has a disability, which is in fact an advantage, not limiting at all. That's what mindful versus mindless does to our thinking and opens up opportunities.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Really powerful.
So cool.
Yeah.
You touched on it a bit earlier. With her, all of her research has come from a Western perspective. She's very open about that, and not coming from an Eastern contemplative perspective, and kind of where she sits in that realm. But there's that really bit, like it's a very clear alignment between the two, right? So,
absolutely. So when we talk about the category piece, which creates an automated thought process that if we don't participate in, it kind of just happens without us.
Yeah.
When we're developing mindfulness, when we're practicing mindfulness, one of the competencies that we're developing, or the capabilities of the mind, is to view each stimulus as fresh and new. Okay, so rather than going, it's a door and it's another door and now it's another door, the practice of mindfulness is about being fully present each time the stimulus arrives and being able to experience it new as if it's the first time you've experienced it.
Yeah, okay.
And that's actually what, from a contemplative perspective, is saying is being fully present. Okay. So there's real parallels there between the way that she has described what she has been able to see in cognitive process and subsequent behaviour to that particular capacity which is developed.
Yeah.
Which is explained in contemplative practice and documented for thousands of years. And now she, without having any reference to that, has been able to see exactly the same thing.
That's pretty cool.
And so that's just one example, but there's many examples. So open awareness, for example, is about the ability to experience stimulus without giving it a category.
Yeah.
So you just allow it to exist on its own without actually deciding what it is and putting it somewhere.
Yeah.
And so if you develop that capacity over time, then you will tend to be much more open to things because those judgments aren't as automatic.
Yeah.
Those categories aren't as strong. So many parallels in her work. She's just very careful to make sure that people understand that's just not the space she's ever played.
Yeah.
But when you are familiar with both sides of that scientific inquiry, the parallels are really quite remarkable.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right. If you haven't read her book before, it's called Mindfulness. I highly recommend you go get it. I think it was like released in like the early 90s or something like that.
Oh, yeah. It's not new, but
none of this research is new. It's been out for 30 years now, nearly 30 years. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a great read. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah. I'll just finish. Can I finish with my favourite Ellen Langer story? Yeah. So I was lucky enough to be in a class with her on one of her Australian visits. And she actually paints. She loves painting, and she paints really cool paintings. They're kind of a bit abstract, a little bit, but they've always got this dog in them, really cool dogs doing like cool stuff, right? And she just finished a particular painting and had it hung at home, and she had some friends over for dinner. And it was a picture of a dog in a kitchen up on a stool washing dishes at the sink with its rubber gloves on. You know, that's the sort of kind of playful stuff that she had. And anyway, the people came in and she said, oh, this is my new piece of work. What do you think of it? And one of the friends sort of looked at it and went, it's see there in the kitchen, you've got the cupboard above the hot plates, and in kitchens they don't have, because that's where you cook. And she turned around and she said, yeah, but a dog washing dishes doesn't strike you as being anything odd. And it was just a beautiful story of the category that we have, right? And that's what dictates what we see. So you can see something completely nonsensical like a dog standing on a, on a stool with rubber gloves doing dishes. Yet it's absolutely totally unacceptable that you would have a kitchen where you had a cupboard over the top of the hot plates. It was just a really great story. Yeah. Just so demonstrating mindlessness. Yeah. That's, it was fantastic.
In a nutshell. So,
brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So check her painting out too. Google her because her paintings are really cool.
Cool. I didn't even know she painted. That's awesome.
There you go. Yeah,
very good. All right. Well, thank you for listening today. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mel. And we'll speak to you next time.
Indeed.
Na